private, on display. Today you can sell even someone else's depression if you handle light right and put a price on it. I kept thinking about that at the Tracey Emin exhibition at Tate, and I had no interest in deciding whether I like it or not. That's a cheap question. The more interesting one is this: at what point does someone else's pain stop being just pain and become cultural value? Because the personal on its own guarantees nothing, not depth, not form, not art. But now everything is set up as if bringing trauma, shame, fracture into the open is already enough, as if the wound itself is already talent. That's what I don't believe. Tracey Emin is not interesting because she's brave or honest. Those are lazy words. Bravery doesn't make art. Confession doesn't make art. Her strength is somewhere else. She made the personal large. She gave it weight. She didn't smooth it over. She didn't make it comfortable, and that's her strength. But that's also where the unpleasant conversation begins, because the moment the personal becomes language, it changes. It's no longer just pain. It becomes the form of pain. No longer just truth, the form of truth. And anything that becomes legible too easily becomes usable very quickly for art, for institutions, and for the market. I don't believe in a fairy tale of a pure art existing somewhere outside money and power. Art has always been tied to commission, status, elite taste, the market. What's new is something else. Now we are not only selling the object, we are selling the moral aura around the object. You're not only being sold the thing, you are being sold the feeling that you are sensitive, perceptive, capable of reading pain correctly. And the viewer is not only buying the work, the viewer is buying themselves next to the work. The institution is not just background here. The white wall is not neutral. No, Tate does not simply show. Tate authorizes. It says, this matters. This is culture now. This deserves attention. The moment personal material enters that space, it is no longer merely personal. It's confirmed, lit, packaged. And the question changes immediately. Are we looking at pain? A pain that has already been given a cultural passport? And then the whole thing becomes almost comic. In ordinary life, not many people would stand in front of someone else's unmade bed as if they were standing before an altar. In a museum they will, because it's no longer just a bed. My bed sold at Christie's in 2014 for £2,546,000 and something pounds. At that point, is no longer mess, depression, or someone else's difficult night, as quite often more of us experience this. Now, it's a cultural value worth £2.5 million. That is what the institution does best. It does not simply show pain. It makes people look at pain as value. And people do not come there only for art. They come to look at they come to look at something that has already been granted permission to be great. And at themselves beside it too, how much they understand, how much they feel, whether they are the kind of people who go to Tate. And if I'm being completely honest, sometimes they come not so much for the art as for the feeling of their own importance beside already recognized importance. And at that point, it is pointless to whine that money ruined everything. Money does not simply ruin. Money enlarges. The problem is not the artist gets paid. The problem is that the system starts loving precisely what can already be quickly recognized, quickly explained, and beautifully sold. The market does not love risk. No, the market loves risk once risk has become readable. The institution does not love chaos. The institution loves chaos once chaos has been translated into language. That is one of the most unpleasant truths about contemporary art. What is often sold to us is not truth itself, but its processed version, and not pain itself, but the form of pain that can already be shown, discussed, and sold. That's why I was interested in looking at Tracey Emin not as a heroine of confession that is too small. It's much more interesting to see where form is doing the work, and where the work is being carried simply by the force of the material. Because people constantly confuse the power of the subject with the power of the work. If there is trauma, shame, the body, fracture, they immediately assume they are in the presence of strong art. But heavy material is not the same thing as a strong work. That's where taste matters. Not to say quickly, I like it or I don't, but to stop and see what has actually been made here, and what is only being held up by the force of the wind. And that probably is the most unpleasant truth. The system does not kill pain. The system makes it usable. Usable for display, usable for respect, usable for price, usable for sale. What is being sold today is not only art. What is being sold today is the form of truth. And if you don't not see that, it becomes very easy to mistake well-presented pain for depth.